On this Saturday night, buried in snow, the historic and deadly snowstorm blanketing Buffalo.
You got this giant mound of snow behind you. What do we got here?
That's my car.
The race to dig out before another heavy dump.
This is winter. This is it for us, you know.
Plus, the thick wall of snow blowing over our border. On the West Coast, the complete opposite.
British Columbia has been, in Canada, has felt like ground zero for climate change.
COP27 creeps into overtime.
We cannot leave by having abandoned the possibility of keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius alive.
The sticking points preventing a goal being kicked at the climate summit. And offside already.
Today I feel disabled. Today I feel a migrant worker.
The bizarre comments by the boss of FIFA.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Quite the scene in western New York State. Residents digging out after more than 1.5 meters of snow blanketed the region. The past 24 hours has been difficult, but it's also been dangerous. At least 2 deaths are being connected to the storm, heart attacks from shoveling snow. As Jennifer Johnson reports in our top story tonight, with more flurries on the way, it's possible this storm could be one for the record books.
It looked like a scene out of a sci-fi movie. Drone footage showing a wall of snow rolling into Buffalo. Western New York State is being slammed by an historic snowstorm that has closed roads, triggered driving bans, and left thousands stranded. Local residents, no strangers to big storms, say they've never seen anything like this.
When you see that wall of snow, it's insane. It's indescribable.
The storm has broken a New York record for the most snowfall in a 24-hour period. So much snow that Sunday's Buffalo Bills football game against the Cleveland Browns has had to be moved to Detroit. The stadium's green turf is now hidden under a heavy blanket of white.
This snow is so heavy. I got a heavy-duty plow, and I'm having a hard time.
11 New York counties are under a state of emergency. Jackknifed tractor-trailer trucks have shut down highways. Everywhere you look, cars and motorists are stranded.
I was stuck in the intersection for about a solid 30-45 minutes and trying to rock the car out. Luckily, the cops came and they gave me a push.
Thousands of people have lost power as the temperatures plummet in the Buffalo area, but officials are begging people to stay home if they can.
Some of the worst conditions that our public works department and sheriff's deputies have ever faced.
Crews at Buffalo's International Airport are working around the clock moving the heavy snow to keep runways clear, but hundreds of flights have been canceled or delayed from Detroit to New York, especially difficult on this busy travel weekend ahead of Thanksgiving.
You pray you make it. You have to have buffers, a buffer there and a buffer back.
About 6 million Americans from upper Michigan to New York have been under snow alerts. Many blame global warming for heating up the Great Lakes, causing the air above to hold more moisture and produce more snow.
Just shelter in place and we'll get through this together.
Unfortunately, this relentless wallop isn't ending soon. More snow is in the forecast for Sunday and early next week. An already record-breaking storm poised to break even more records. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Let's go straight to Global's chief meteorologist, Anthony Farnell, who is now in Niagara Falls. But Anthony, you spent yesterday and this morning in Buffalo. What was it like?
Oh, it's just incredible to see a couple of things, how fast the cleanup is underway. There are truckloads of snow being removed from that city every minute, it seems like. But earlier, we were in one of the hardest hit areas around Orchard Park, that's south of Buffalo, where an incredible 195 centimeters of snow fell. That was enough to completely bury cars. Incredible drifts coming off of the roofs of houses, and also playgrounds that don't look like playgrounds anymore. There was a fence around one that was about 4 feet high and you could barely see it. So that's just a sign of how much snow is there. And as far as getting here to Niagara Falls, it wasn't easy. One of the major highways, Interstate 90, remained closed throughout the day. There were transport trucks lining the side streets waiting for that to open. Farah?
All right. And what's happening on our side of the border where you are?
Well, it's snowing here in Niagara Falls. We're tracking this same snow squall. It's actually teamed up with a Lake Ontario snow squall and bringing near zero visibility. They're expecting another 15 to about 30 centimeters of snow in this area starting in the next hour or two. So it's not done yet. Tomorrow the winds shift, and that could bring more snow to areas like the north end of Toronto that hasn't really seen it as of yet. Farah?
Well, we are getting closer to winter. Anthony Farnell, thanks so much. Have a safe drive home. Trying to avert more unprecedented weather was also at the center of the COP27 climate summit in Egypt. It was supposed to end on Friday, but it's now gone into overtime. Right now, it's the middle of the night in Sharm el-Sheikh, and negotiations are still going on with no new agreement to tackle the climate crisis and to compensate the smaller nations bearing the brunt of it. Though, as Mike Drolet reports, that hasn't stopped potential solutions from being met with intense skepticism.
Moments after throwing flour on an Andy Warhol-painted car in Italy, climate activists were dragged away. An absurd act, they called it, for an increasingly absurd climate crisis. Far away at COP27 in Egypt, a climate deal that looked like a long shot a day ago
look forward to good news.
Now seems within reach, or at least part of it. For the first time, there is agreement to create a loss and damage fund which would cover climate change damages incurred by poorer countries such as those in Africa devastated by drought and famine.
We need to stop when disasters happen. We need to stop clearly just sending thoughts and prayers to people facing devastation. And this is one way that actually signals that this process is listening to those folks all over the world.
But key questions remain unanswered. Which countries and industries will pay for it, and how much? Those details will be decided over the next year. The other big issue on the table was the COP26 goal of reducing emissions in hopes of keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius.
For us and many others, there can't be any backsliding on 1.5 degrees Celsius. We cannot leave Sharm el-Sheikh by having abandoned the possibility of keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius alive.
That goal could be harder to reach. Only 30 countries improved their climate plans since last year's summit. Canada, for one, has made promises, but it's unclear how they'll be met. And scientists say that has to change, because to remain under the 1.5 degree limit, global emissions would need to be cut 43% by 2030. But at our current pace, they'll dip less than 1% by then.
We have to be honest. The gap is really huge. And it is huge because we continue to rely on pathways that are fossil fuel dependent. That is the reality.
World leaders, he says, need to commit to change. Time is running out. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Weeks into November, much of Canada is already seeing its fair share of wintry conditions. Yet in British Columbia, a severe lack of rainfall continues to take a toll on the west coast. In the Fraser Valley, east of Vancouver, homes were even put on evacuation alert this week over a wildfire. And as Neetha Garcha explains, experts warn the severity of droughts isn't just defined by less rain, but also human actions, magnifying the climate crisis.
The place dubbed as Canada's wet coast faces compounding consequences of a months-long drought. A state of emergency was extended to this month in the dried-out Sunshine Coast, and much of the lower mainland has been under extreme drought conditions as well, allowing a wildfire believed to be human-caused to take hold and force evacuation alerts near Agassiz, about 100 kilometers east of Vancouver.
It's not safe to put fire crews on the ground on the hillside. A number of trees are blowing down in the wind, and then, of course, they're shooting down the hill similar to a torpedo.
The drought hit and the creek was dry.
While salmon hatcheries like this one in Metro Vancouver are seeing more dead fish than live fish.
We could lose a whole season of chum.
Here, another species of salmon, coho, are being pulled from the creek to have their eggs harvested.
The water has disappeared in a large part, and the fish that are in the creek have nowhere to go. They can't spawn.
It's not clear whether the salmon decline is due to the drought. Experts say BC has historically seen similar droughts, but warn human-caused pressures will lead to even more frequent and extreme weather events fueled by the climate crisis.
With the human impacts of warmer temperatures, land use change,
the severity of these droughts are going to be worse.
British Columbia in Canada has felt like ground zero for climate change in the past couple of years, right? We had a devastating heat wave last year, followed by the fires, which were then followed by the floods, this sort of series of compound events.
This Canadian climate scientist was a delegate at the UN Climate Change Conference in Egypt.
What really matters is when this meeting's done, what happens when all these delegates and government representatives go home.
Ongoing overconsumption and inadequate resource management are among the biggest contributors experts say worsen the effects of the climate crisis.
We need to be telling the government what we want it to do at the municipal level, provincial level, and definitely at the federal level to see action on climate change.
Meaning we can expect more dismal conditions like this unless more is done sooner. Neetu Garsha, Global News.
Ukraine's deputy prime minister sits down with Global News. Coming up, her country's request to Canada. Plus, LGBTQ plus fans boycotting the World Cup in Qatar. Canada's Prime Minister is on the home stretch of his 10-day foreign tour. Today, Justin Trudeau touched down in Tunisia for the Francophonie Summit, the final stop. He's there to form closer ties with members as Russia's invasion of Ukraine sends food prices soaring across Africa. But a key domestic issue played an important role in his first one-on-one meeting. Mackenzie Gray has more from Djerba. Mackenzie.
Farah, the Prime Minister's made his final stop on his 10-day around-the-world trip in Djerba, Tunisia, for La Francophonie. An excited French President Emmanuel Macron greeted Justin Trudeau. The two leaders put up the vast majority of the funds for this organization, dedicated to the promotion of the French language. But it's the deteriorating situation in Haiti that's also a major concern for member states. Tomorrow, Canada is set to host a meeting of 13 other countries on the topic. Today, Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly announced sanctions against 3 new Haitians.
Everybody recognizes that there's an issue happening in Haiti and that we need to step up our game and do more. So that's our job.
The Prime Minister also carved out time to touch on a major domestic issue, discussing healthcare in a sit-down with Quebec Premier François Legault. The federal government had unsuccessful negotiations with the provinces earlier this month to increase the Canada Health Transfer. In response, the Liberals have now signaled they're willing to do bilateral deals with each province. The host of the summit, Tunisian President Kais Saied, has frequently been condemned by Canada for recently granting himself sweeping new powers. Saied sacked the Tunisian Prime Minister, dissolved Parliament, and has jailed journalists. These concerns prompted Ottawa to push for La Francophonie to be postponed. Quebec pondered a boycott, but both ended up attending, using the opportunity to raise human rights and democratic concerns. Member countries are expected to re-elect the current Secretary General and vote to have Paris host the 2024 gathering. Trudeau will fly back to Ottawa tomorrow night, ending one of the longest trips he's had as Prime Minister. Farah.
Thanks, Mackenzie. That's Mackenzie Gray in Tunisia. The war in Ukraine is in the crosshairs at this year's International Security Forum being held in Halifax. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told officials gathering at the summit he wants Canada's help spearheading a long-term peace plan to end the war for good.
An honest peace can only be the result of the complete demolition of Russian aggression. And I'm asking you to help us implement this formula. This is the only way to the real peace.
Zelensky made the comments in a pre-recorded video to kick off the forum in Halifax. He listed 10 critical steps to achieve real peace, including the full-scale withdrawal of Russian forces, ensuring the country's food and energy security, and Ukraine's territorial integrity. And Ukraine's deputy prime minister is on the ground in Halifax for that security forum, and she spoke with our Mercedes Stevenson.
We got used to live in darkness. Both being affected severely by multiple crimes committed against people, but also the first thing I noticed when I landed to Montreal is that there's so much light around you. This is not what we have. But I think that what is more important is the spirit. This is the spirit which cannot be undermined by any measures of demoralization Russia tries to put on Ukraine, whether it's destroying critical infrastructure, attacking residential buildings, massive torturing of population in the occupied areas, or any failure on a battlefield which forces them to use the hybrid warfare as a major method of their aggression. So I think that the major spirit in Ukraine is that there's no way to surrender. There's only way to victory. And this leads to a permanent failure of Russian Federation. Although, of course, the suffering and the losses among population are really, really serious.
And you can see the full interview with Mercedes Stevenson and the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister tomorrow on the West Block, right here on Global. Ahead, the World Cup that's anything but normal. Qatar 2022 kicks off in a cloud of criticism. Alphonso Davies and the Canada's men's soccer team is now in Qatar, gearing up for what could be the biggest tournament of their lives. As fans and athletes from around the world brace for the FIFA World Cup that is kicking off tomorrow. But for many others, it is hard to get excited because of the controversial host country. Qatar has a poor human rights record, notably over the treatment of immigrant workers leading up to the tournament. Yet today, FIFA's president tried to deflect criticism. He says he understands discrimination, equating it to how he was bullied in school for his freckles, and attacks what he calls hypocrisy from Western nations.
I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons.
Qatar's treatment of the LGBTQ+ community has also drawn concerns and criticism. As Redmond Shannon reports, human rights advocates say the country's law on homosexuality make it an unsafe place for fans to visit.
The biggest single sport event in the world is almost here.
We're just excited to be here because it's first time to us to see the trophy.
Qatar is a tiny country, very wealthy from natural gas, but with a poor human rights record. Migrant workers toiled in brutal heat to build stadiums. The Guardian newspaper estimated more than 6,000 immigrant workers from South Asia died over a decade, a number Qatar's government says is misleading. But it doesn't shy away from its policy on same-sex relationships, which are illegal and can result in imprisonment. One Qatari tournament ambassador recently called homosexuality a damage in the mind. Another man being paid handsomely as an ambassador is David Beckham, once regarded as an icon in the gay community.
I think it's important when you're a visitor to a country that you respect the culture of your host nation.
Britain's Foreign Secretary recently drew criticism for this advice. England's head coach says he won't be silencing his players, as FIFA has requested.
We have always spoken about issues that we think should be talked about, particularly the ones we feel we can affect.
England's team captain will wear this armband, and the team flew to Doha in a plane called Rainbow. Other teams say they'll make similar gestures.
I have traditionally also watched it my whole life, every single one. I've never missed one. But I just don't feel that it's ethically right for me to watch it this year.
Helen Kennedy is executive director of LGBT+ advocacy group Egal Canada. She says rather than pushing for change at a tournament, human rights standards should be a prerequisite of hosts.
It's just a horrendous situation for queer folks in these jurisdictions. And so I, point the finger squarely in FIFA's direction that they need to take accountability.
Canada Soccer says it wants improved inclusivity in Qatar to be a legacy of the tournament. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, uncovering hidden galaxies. Meet part of the team behind the James Webb Telescope. NASA's James Webb Telescope is a game changer. The telescope that was developed in partnership with the Canadian Space Agency is uncovering hidden secrets of the universe. But without the help of science visual developers, we would not be able to see the images. For their new reality, Marianne Demain has been exploring this new frontier. Marianne.
Even if you're not a space buff, it's hard not to be impressed by the spectacular images captured by the Webb telescope. The clarity and level of detail are unprecedented, and it takes special skills to translate the science into something we can view. That's because Webb is looking as far back as 13.5 billion years and revealing galaxies as they looked around the time when the Earth and Sun were formed. Webb sees infrared light, something humans aren't able to view. So science visual developers Joe DePasquale and Elisa Pagon, working out of the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, are interpreting the data Webb is sending back.
We can't see in the infrared, so there has to be some level of translation here. But we use physical meaning, like true physical science, in order to represent sort of the color.
And it's the job of Lisa and I to take that data, to stretch it so that we can see what's in the data, and then we apply color according to those wavelengths. And so the shortest wavelength filters that we have, we use blue for those. And as we move into longer and longer wavelengths, we go to greens and then reds. And liftoff.
Launched on Christmas Day 2021, Webb is far more powerful than its predecessor, the Hubble telescope. This is the pillars of creation, as seen by Hubble in 1995. And now, this is what Webb is showing us.
What we're seeing when we look at these images is the raw material for life. The detail, the clarity, the color, it all just hit me all at once that, yeah, Webb is a next generation observatory. It's going to change astronomy forever.
As the telescope travels through outer space, it will continue to reveal secrets of the early universe, a world we could only once imagine. Farah, back to you.
Oh, it makes you feel so insignificant. That is Marianne Domain in Toronto. Thanks, Marianne. And you can watch Marianne's full report on the new reality tonight at 7 on Global. And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole team here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is from another region slammed by snow, Fort Erie, Ontario. But the blistering cold hasn't stopped this brave surfer. We love seeing Your Canada, so please keep emailing us your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Until we're together tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.